Blockchain is, or at least was a few weeks ago, under attack as a consensus opinion by a lot of governments and a lot of politicians in the world. And we're seeing that start to change. This is not the time to be fighting each other about whose scaling roadmap is marginally better over a 6 to 18 month time horizon. So, we really have to keep our eye on the ball here, I think.
This episode is brought to you by Helium Mobile. They've created a crypto-native phone plan for unlimited talk, text, and data for just $20 a month. We'll chat more about them later in the show. Before we get moving on today's episode, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast by either myself, my co-host, or any guests are their personal views and do not represent the views of any associated organization. Nothing in the episode should be construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or any other advice. Okay, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. We're recording this episode on June 5th, and we are joined today by Austin Federa, the head of strategy at the Solana Foundation and host of the Validated podcast. If you've spent some time on Solana, you've definitely come in contact with Austin, likely through Twitter. He's very vocal about all the right things, and it's exciting to kind of have you on this pod, man. There's so much to talk about in Solana. Right before we kind of jumped into things, we were like, what should we talk about? And we just rattled off 13 or 14 different topics that would have been great to hit. So man, thanks a ton for coming on. Super excited to get your take on this very exciting first half of the year. And when you look out at these last 6 months, I want to get your takes on both the highlights and the lowlights and how you frame those different concepts in your mind.
Yeah. Well, first, let me start with saying you guys do a great job on the show. And one of the great things about it is I have not ever been on. So this is great. There's been such an awesome series of Solana builders. I know you cover many other ecosystems too, but that you haven't had to go to folks who work at the foundation. You've actually been able to go direct to builders. So props for getting a year plus before foundation ends up on the docket here.
We got a big debut. You're right.
Yeah. So, to get to kind of your question, so H1 of this year, the first half of this year has been, pretty unprecedented for Solana. I think a lot of this, there's a lot of different stories you can tell about the sort of return of Solana from a user perspective, network volume perspective, chart perspective, for lack of a better term as well. And a lot of those stories actually don't start in 2024 or even 2023. A lot of them start at the end of 2022. Everyone's favorite exchange collapsing very unexpectedly and tanking the market as it did so. And there was really kind of a feeling for probably a week or so in the crypto space and the Solana community as well of are we going to get through this? And I think most of the builders in the Solana ecosystem, especially the very technical folks, looked around and kind of saw everyone else standing still and said, all right, well, we're just going to put our heads back down and keep building. And they built through the bear. And those projects, we're talking about Jito and Jupiter and MarginFi, these teams that really just said, I'm going to tune out all the noise and all the FUD and keep building the products. Those were the ones who started launching in Q3 of 2023, right? And even a little earlier than that. This is sort of around the time of Breakpoint last year. We started seeing a ton of attention come back to the Solana ecosystem as people realized these projects that had kind of been quiet for the last year, they were quiet because they'd been building, and now suddenly they were launching. And it showed really a very different type of product that could be built on Solana that was still hardcore DeFi, deeply technical, but had a lot of different characteristics because it was built in a different way. And so that sort of, uptick, for lack of a better term, started around Breakpoint last year, and it really accelerated in the first half of this year. There's been, several impressive engineering launches, right? One is the launch of token extensions, all of the work that's been done on the core layer to really shore up a lot of the base of Solana. And, there was some congestion this year, which we can also talk about as well for kind of a 2-week period. But what we saw there is all these folks who've been building on Solana for the last year or two, and, Helios is one of these groups too, came together and sort of said, hey, we have a bunch of ideas that might be able to address and fix, this congestion issue that we've been seeing. And that was not a foundation-led initiative. That was not an Anza-led initiative. That was a group of people of, probably 10 or 20 different core contributor teams from across the network, all saying hey, we've got ideas about how to improve this. And so for me, we can say, yes, there's a lot of more activity on Solana. There's more projects on Solana. There's 20,000 meme coins being being launched today on the network. But the real thing is the social layer, the highly technical builder social layer has never been stronger on the network. It's starting to, over time, reflect the same powerhouse strength you see in Ethereum, which is why that network has been such a powerhouse and been able to endure so much over the last, however many years, is what, 8 years since Ethereum launched.
Actually, I do want to maybe just set the context for the audience because
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've asked anybody this since the Anza Solana Labs thing, but could you briefly describe the role of Solana Foundation, Solana Labs, and then Anza?
Yeah, great question. So, the Solana Foundation is a organization, it's a nonprofit based in Switzerland, like most blockchain foundations are nowadays, dedicated to the decentralization, the advancement, the adoption, and the security of the Solana blockchain. And so that's a lot of words, but what that really practically means is, our role is not as a primary engineering organization at the foundation. It works on a lot of engineering coordination work. So making sure that core contributors from multiple groups are talking to one another, that there is a, open and transparent process for the SIMD process, for the Solana improvement proposals. It's the main grant giving entity in the Solana ecosystem as well. It runs the Solana Foundation delegation program. And, we do a bunch of sort of, I'd say, custodial activities, not from a crypto perspective, but like more of a janitorial perspective of, maintaining Solana.com, the Explorer, Twitter, marketing, those sorts of things as well. But, a lot of the function is as a support organization for teams building on Solana. This is quite different than something like Solana Labs. And Solana Labs is, if you're coming from an Ethereum world, it's kind of akin to Consensus. It is a bit of a product studio. It has launched a bunch of different products and technologies over the years, whether that's GameShift or Solana Mobile or the original development work from Metaplex. All of that stuff took place at Solana Labs. That's also where Solana Ventures sits. So that is your typical for-profit product studio with a venture firm kind of attached to it model. Anza Technologies is a fairly new organization. I think they're about a year old at this point. And that is comprised of a lot of engineers who used to work on the core Solana Labs client when it was at Solana Labs. And so a bunch of those engineers have now moved out of Solana Labs into this new organization they founded called Anza. I think it's something like 93% of the staff there are engineers. Then there's, just a few like HR and legal people as well. But part of that movement was to give that organization more freedom to do different types of development on Solana. Anza's primary focus and charge is building the Agave validator client, which is the continuation of the Solana Labs code base. But they're also, doing contract development work, for lack of a better term, for other groups in the ecosystem that might have really, complex technical products they need built or just need sort of an additional set of eyes on some of those things that it's working on. And that's just sort of the, Solana family of organizations as well. Then, of course, we have, Jump building the validator client Firedancer, MarginFi and Mango and other groups have been core contributors, either active or previously. Helius does a ton of work on the RPC level, which is kind of above the network, but still very important to the success of it. And then there's other groups like Metaplex that are building, the primary NFT standard on the network as well. So, when the question is like, who are the core contributors to Solana? And the answer is kind of whoever shows up.
So actually talking about Firedancer, let's just go into that briefly. You just did a podcast and released it today on June 5th with Kevin Bowers, the man
Yes.
himself. What did you learn anything new from that? Like, what are your takeaways from your conversation with him? What is your overall sentiment about how Firedancer is going? What it will mean for the network?
Yeah, working with Kevin Bowers, and he's a very busy person. I don't really get to talk to him that often, but he is a national treasure, I think is the correct terminology to use here. His clarity of thought on how modern computer science and software engineering has gone wrong and the ways that can be corrected, has been of huge success to, high frequency trading firms and particle physics laboratories and the scientific computing endeavor earlier in his career. And he's sort of bringing that to bear now against building a validator client for a globally distributed network, trying to synchronize the world's information as close to the speed of light as possible. And really what the Firedancer team and Kevin Bowers is working on is that networking stack. right? So Solana is roughly three parts. There's the networking stack, there's the runtime, and there's the consensus. And so, sitting down with him at this sort of meetup in Chicago for a bunch of core engineers and being able to talk about sort of what's going on with the Firedancer project, one of the things I was surprised at, which is not actually directly related to the Firedancer work, but how performant a bunch of the Anza code actually is in Agave. That the networking stack is primarily the thing in Solana right now that is holding the entire system back. It's not the runtime, it's not consensus. It is the ability to do signature verification, to do deduplication of packets and transactions, and it's the ability to sort of do that fast in real time and pick which transactions are going to get in on a specific block. That whole scheduler, all of that is pre-runtime and consensus. And so that was kind of one of the more fascinating pieces I learned. I think we've all, been following the updates that Firedancer, puts out occasionally about how many hundreds of thousands of transactions per second they have running in test environments. But the really impressive thing was the assumption for a long time was we will get there eventually, and that will require a bunch of rewrites of the runtime, rewrites of consensus, and that's still very much part of the project because you need that for decentralization and security. But it's less important for performance. The networking stack rewrite seems to be, a significant portion of the performance increases that can be eked out without any changes really to the runtime or the consensus part of the existing client. And that surprised me. I actually didn't expect that to be the case.
Decentralized physical infrastructure networks are a massive point of emphasis in the crypto industry today, and Helium Mobile is a fantastic example of a business that is leveraging this distribution approach. Like any network, there's a supply and a demand side. So the supply comes from hotspot deployers, while the demand comes from phone plan subscribers. Together, they create and power a decentralized wireless network that provides expanded connectivity and amazingly priced phone plans. But let's zoom in on how it works for deployers. So you get this device and you set up this hotspot, and anytime a Helium Mobile phone user is near your device, they will send and receive data through the internet using your device instead of their cellular network. The cool thing here is that you earn mobile token rewards for providing this service based on the amount of data routed by your device and how much coverage you're creating. There's also what are called boosted locations, which are directing rewards to the targeted areas that actually help individuals and businesses deploy these devices in the proper areas where coverage is actually needed based on where subscribers are. Currently, that's in LA and Miami, but soon to be coming to New York City. Again, by creating coverage, you're helping build a better network together while earning mobile token rewards. If providing the service is something that's up your alley, head over to hellohelium.com/hotspot to get 15% off your indoor or outdoor Helium mobile hotspot using the code LIGHTSPEEDHOTSPOT. That is all caps, no space, LIGHTSPEEDHOTSPOT. And we'll be sure to put that link in the show notes.
One thing I'm curious about personally is people on the internet like to talk about some, 5-10 year time horizons and, being able to handle 1 million TPS or 8 billion users and like Ethereum's roadmap. And Solana doesn't really have the concept of a roadmap, right? And so I'm assuming you guys have talks with, enterprise or something that might ask about kind of that topic. What do you think the Solana roadmap is? Is there one? Does that question even make sense?
So I think we have to be kind of specific in what we mean when we say roadmap. So there have been dozens of Ethereum roadmaps, and very few of them have actually gotten built, right? What the roadmap is it's an exercise in saying, what do we think based on our best understanding of how this technology is evolving and how things will work in prod, what we think we will probably be building in a year from now. And my work previously to joining Solana Labs and the Solana Foundation was at Bison Trails, and we were working on the Ethereum 2 infrastructure there when sharding was the main scaling model for Ethereum. And that has been, the roadmap has been significantly changed from that point. And it's really good to have these sort of like paperwork products that show updates of how something is going to be going. But a roadmap for roadmap's sake is the sort of definition of busy work to some extent, right? And so what we're really looking at when you look at, how do you actually manage something like scaling the Solana network up to a target of 1 million transactions per second, over the next 2 years? You look at that and you say, well, where are the bottlenecks in the system? And we don't, because this is Ando's law, right? to paraphrase this, the slowest part of a system is the limiting factor for the system. If there's 10 things that need to be improved, improving the first 9 does nothing. Improving the 10th unlocks, exponential increase in network capacity. You will not find those bottlenecks until you start unblocking other parts of the stack. And so to say, oh, we have this like well thought out 3-year roadmap of how Solana will hit 1 million TPS, the thing there is we actually don't know enough about where the bottlenecks are. And I think any honest engineer is going to say a very similar thing. So by setting targets and setting objectives and setting sort of paradigms of how software engineering should be conducted, these things need to be permissionless, they need to be decentralized, right? All of these sorts of values we instill into it. You can actually have a much more free engineering process. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need documentation and you don't need a lot of coordination and support. In fact, a lot of the work that's being done between the Anza team and the Firedancer team is on things like feature activations in terms of, when is 118 versus 119 versus 2.0 going to be rolling out across the network. Those things have to be coordinated. But at the end of the day, that's not a roadmap activity. That's release engineering, which is sort of a different, animal in its own right.
I just think that's really helpful context of I will give credit to Vitalik. His diagram is very pretty and it's visually
great.
appealing, and then you it looks pretty, so I think it gets a lot of airtime, and then you actually sit down with it and digest it. You're like, oh wow, this is like a very impressively thought out plan. But I agree with your points around the ability to change. I think is critical, and I don't think he would disagree with that either, right? And over the course of Ethereum's life, we've seen a lot of that, and I've also seen some strange discourse on people pushing back and saying like, oh, well, they're not sticking to the plan. I'm like, well, of course not.
Right.
So yeah, I really echo your sentiment around that. And if we look out over like the near term, like what are some major milestones, let's say, that people should look out for as the core contributors kind of build through this roadmap, if you will?
Yeah, so there's this thing that happens, every time a new piece of technology is released, which is that there's some excitement about it, and then there's the adoption of everyone actually has to go build for it, and then a while later people start getting excited about it again. This is the path L2s went through when they launched in 2021, but realistically, L2s have not really come into their own until sort of the end of 2023, which is totally legit. Things take a long time to build, but you see framework technologies on Solana kind of going through that same curve as well. We saw this with compressed NFTs, where compressed NFTs launched, and then maybe 6 months later is when the adoption really started to hit. And we're seeing that as well now with token extensions. So even though token extensions were launched and announced in January, we're really just starting to see 80% of Solana applications supporting token extensions, issuers starting to look at them as their primary framework to issue on. And I think we have not seen the benefits of token extension adoption yet as a community and as a network. So even though that's not something to look for that's like net new, the adoption piece will, I think, very much be new. And, PayPal, which announced their PYUSD at Consensus this year, that is built on token extensions. And suddenly every exchange that said, well, token extensions are interesting, but we don't have a flagship use case yet for them. If they want to support, the PayPal stablecoin on Solana, they now are building out support for token extensions as well. And so that's one for me that is quite exciting. There's a few other things that are coming. One of them is sort of an upgrade to compression technology to make it more composable and easier to use in different types of applications. This is called generalized account compression or generalized compression.
We're calling it ZK compression.
Yeah, part of ZK compression as well, right? And so that all is 3, 4, 5 months away, something along those lines. But if folks are looking for stuff to look forward to and sort of what that will change, this is one way to solve the problem that rent is too damn high on Solana today, right? There's a lot of ways to solve this, and the best ways to solve this is reducing rent. But state compression can also be another way to solve this as well, although it hoists a little bit more work onto the RPC layer.
One thing that I find interesting in the past few weeks, which the PayPal news somewhat reminded me of, is marketing.
Yeah.
And people, because it's funny, I'm not sure how many people followed me back then, but like 2 years ago, I was kind of like, Solana has awful marketing and like we have to like really change this and whatnot. And then like OPAS came. And then now Ethereum people are like, Solana has really good marketing, Ethereum has really bad marketing, which, first of all, I don't agree with. But I'm curious from the foundation's perspective. Actually, no, just from your personal perspective, how do you think about marketing in the context of blockchains and institutional adoption?
So I think this is a really hard question to get right. And Solana Foundation absolutely has not gotten this right. I think we have lucked in a few places, and we've missed out in a few places, and we've over-indexed in a few other places, but we're still probably doing a better job than any other foundation out there, just in my view. Um, the hard part about marketing blockchain is or like marketing Solana is it's like trying to market like America. Right? Like, there's so many different things that happen in this country that are we marketing Yosemite? Are we marketing the Statue of Liberty? Are we marketing tax-free business or tax-friendly areas for new business development? Are we marketing like the beaches in California, right? Are we marketing like the bourbon in Kentucky? Like, there's so many different parts of a country that actually thinking about how do you market a country is a really, really tough concept. And so you either end up distilling it down into dumb platitudes like pickup trucks and American Pie, or you get these very like political ideologies that kind of are, America is for freedom and it's for democracy, which like, you know, most countries, many countries of freedom, many countries of democracy, like things end up getting watered down to the point where they no longer are meaningful. And this is where you enter the category of brand marketing. And, my personal opinion is brand marketing is one of the largest wastes of money for things in blockchain because brand marketing for software subsystems, like only nerds really care about how this stuff works. Nerds and engineers and builders. And that's good. Like, you know, builders building on Solana have to deeply care about how Solana works and why it works. People who are just having a great time using applications on the network, trading tokens, doing their thing, moisturized and living their best life unbothered, they really don't need to worry about how proof of history works and just how impressive Firedancer is and, how Turbine's block propagation engine is sort of this like incredibly novel piece of engineering that like does something that makes block propagation much better. It's sort of like saying, well, before you download TikTok, we really need to talk to you about HTTPS, right? Like, that's just not the way that consumer products are marketed. And so this is like a long way to get back to your answer of marketing on Solana. The best marketing by far are the projects built on the network. But if the network is an opposition, right? If the network is seen as being something where, there's like the first question you get from investors is, why are you building on Solana? That is actually the exact type of problem that something like the Solana Foundation is uniquely set up to solve, right? It shouldn't be the job of Mert to defend why he's building on Solana, right? It should be the job of Mert to build the best product he possibly can on Solana. And so our job at the foundation is, and this is how we apply things to policy, to regulation, to marketing, to comms, to, relationships with anyone sort of in the space, is our job is to unblock. It's not to direct what should happen. It's to say there's a barrier here that is sort of a collective action problem. It's really hard for, all these independent software developers building on Solana to say, hey, here's why Solana is actually a legitimate network and you should pay attention to it. Like, the only possible on Solana came from Twitter, right? It was not created by someone at Foundation. It was not a marketing agency that, Mad Men style came up with 35 different slogans and someone picked one off a board. This was sort of an emergent property that, the foundation picked up and ran with and said, all right, this thing's got some traction. We can tell a whole bunch of stories about things that are truly only possible on Solana. And, that was sort of a large campaign to do that. You've seen that sort of get pulled back now because it's done its job. And so now it's letting the builders, rise to the front and center. It's letting the projects on Solana speak for Solana at that point. And that is like the strongest marketing I think you can do. You won't see the Solana Foundation, putting up ads on subways or giant billboards or something along those lines, because once we've solved that problem, or at least diminish the problem of Solana being seen as something that, is not legitimate in the eyes of a certain class of, person in blockchain or outside of blockchain, the problem solved. It's time to move on to other things, which is really supporting builders on the network.
You probably won't like this question, but you talked about how America is like, let's say marketed as, democracy and freedom. Ethereum has maybe something similar where they try to do things like, credible neutrality and ultrasound money.
Yeah.
What do you think that looks like for Solana?
I don't think we need the narrative, right, to be successful. I mean, ultrasound money and credible neutrality did not come from like Vitalik and Joe Lubin and the engineers of the Ethereum Foundation. It came, from community, developing theses about why Ethereum was going to be successful, and sort of this moneyness narrative, emerged from a bunch of people in the community kind of agreeing that that was a decent way to describe what the Ethereum project might be trying to do. And eventually these things end up becoming feedback loops where they do start interfacing with the technology and the roadmap and the direction that things happen. The point of Solana kind of remains the same from the start, which is it's a network focused on building a fair and open market in one global state machine to trade on information. Right. This is the original thing of NASDAQ at the speed of light, was sort of like one of these original visions is what would happen if we tried to rebuild something like a centralized exchange in a decentralized distributed way on blockchain. And so, that can feel like a pretty amorphous sort of statement. But the idea there is if you look at like the New York Stock Exchange, there are companies that pay millions of dollars a year to have a server in a data center attached to that exchange. And so there is physical proximity advantage. The physical distance between you as the trader and the exchange floor or the exchange server is your minimum latency to be able to trade. Now, if you have, a network like Solana, which has validators all around the world in this sort of proof of history innovation, which timestamps every transaction as it kind of comes in using this decentralized clock, suddenly you can have multiple concurrent block builders all around the world. And the distance between, me in New York and someone else in Singapore trying to trade against a market on Jupiter averages out to exactly the same. Moment to moment, I may have an advantage or they may have an advantage based on where the leader is at any given moment. But that is sort of the neutrality version of, Solana's vision. Now, that doesn't fit into a soundbite particularly well. So, if anyone's got some ideas, like, let's go for it. But consensus at the speed of light is sort of the closest I think anyone's come up to at this time for it. But that really is kind of that end state vision is multiple block producers, decrease the latency between you and the nearest block producer to as low as possible by having multiple concurrent block producers.
There was a recent Bankless episode with Anatoly and Justin Drake that was widely discussed across crypto Twitter and had some interesting talking points. And one of the things that got brought up pretty heavily was around like timing games that you're kind of describing here with it's all a latency race and he who has the lowest latency will win. This was like a huge fear in the Ethereum community when proof of stake was rolling out, and it's sort of why the community elected to go with MEV boost to avoid this like validator centralization vector of if you have all the latency, you'll have the highest yield. If you have the highest yield, you'll get the most stake. And so you're kind of like trying to avoid like God mode, if you will, for
Sure.
the validator set. How do you think about all of this for sort of in like a broad context? And then if you could like zoom in on how this applies to the current state of Solana and then transitioning out of the current state and more into that end state vision.
Yeah. So if you look at sort of the MEV potential on Ethereum, and totally I think articulated this quite well in the episode, you're basically talking about 4.5 basis points of what time latency could achieve on a network like that. Even if you're optimized up the wazoo, which is not a particularly high amount for consolidation from that point. But Ethereum has all these other tools too. It has, or at least plan to have, correlated slashing, right? This idea that if you are co-locating in a data center and a bunch of nodes go offline at the same time, you will all be slashed higher as a penalty for co-locating. Right. So there's many ways you can actually disincentivize co-location through other factors other than making blocks much longer. Right. And so I think this is one of those things where there's a lot of different ways to sort of address this other than just trying to make blocks long. I mean, timing is the name of the game. Right. Like that is full stop. Right. If what you are trying to do is have a trading advantage over someone else, the time advantage is one of the best types of advantages you can have. The way you address this, though, is you have leaders moving all around the world and multiple concurrent leaders, right? And so the minute that you have that sort of system, and these you can even build in geographic proximities to how the leader schedule is done at some point, right? There's a lot of ways you could address this if it ends up having to be addressed. But to say the way we're going to address this is by artificially slowing things down, like, that is the same logic as the only way to solve spam is to jack up fees, right? It's these sort of nuclear bomb approach to getting rid of an anthill, and fee markets do work. There's no question about that, right? But it has a ton of externalities and a ton of collateral damage that come into transaction fees that cost anywhere from $1 to tens to hundreds of dollars depending on demand. I think the same thing is true when you're looking at networks that are trying to have a longer block time, right? Shorter block times will mean that you can have different types of products built on that start to rival centralized exchanges. I mean, I think we're still a long way away from something like Solana being able to compete with the speed of, the New York Stock Exchange or Binance, right? But we saw news just a few days ago of Citadel and a bunch of other folks trying to build an exchange down in Austin, Texas. That is a proximity thing, right? That is a response to some of the monopolies of East Coast exchanges and, the Chicago exchanges from a timing perspective as well. There's a lot of options here to be able to address these types of problems. And the best one is you just have multiple leaders around the world to help distribute that problem out.
My friends, big news. Blockworks is hosting Permissionless 3 in Salt Lake City this year. So we're heading west for 3 days starting October 9th. Permissionless is our industry's premier DeFi event that brings together crypto natives from all over the globe. I've personally been the last 2 years and can honestly say that the attendees are incredible. It's people who actually care about crypto. We'll also have more than 200 industry titans speaking at the event, and this includes builders like Lucas Bruder from Jito Labs and Brian Pellegrino from Layer Zero, or investors like Kyle Samani and Joe McCann, and even elected officials like Representative Tom Emmer, who's fighting the good fight in Washington. And it's narrative season, so we're going to be covering the 7 hottest themes in crypto. This includes things like modularity and restaking, or Bitcoin and L2s, and even AI and crypto. The goal is to keep you up to speed on major developments in the industry. Ticket prices will be structurally increasing over time, so get your ticket today. For my Lightspeed family, I got you. We're going to use code Lightspeed10 in all caps, no space, for 10% off your ticket. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at Permissionless 3, and let's get back to the show. You mentioned a really interesting point around disincentivizing the bad action which makes sense, right? Like slashing co-located validators is probably a good thing. Or if you can identify where timing games are being played, like, okay, let's either enforce stricter rules or add an additional penalty to avoid things like this. The other thing I'm thinking is sort of the flip side, where the risk is the centralization vector generated from being able to accrue more rewards and offer a higher return to stakers and thus getting more stake. But what if there was a different vector for being a reason to run a validator outside of just being yield maximizing? Do you ever think about that angle of it all? What are the reasons that you would run a validator or stake to a validator that are not to be profit maximizing?
I mean, the core of blockchain is built around using the incentives of profit maximization to produce public goods, right? Like the genius, beautiful thing about blockchain architectural designs is it assumes everyone is a selfish, self-interested actor that wants to screw over everyone else. And yet, normally you would say, oh, well, that just creates chaos and anarchy. Here, it actually creates perfect order and consensus, because the best way for everyone to make the most money is to try and make the most money as individuals within the rules of the game. And if you break the rules of the game, that's where slashing comes at you. That's where TVCs on Solana, timely vote credits come at you, all sorts of different modes to help make that happen. So, hypothetically, if we were to say, okay, so consolidation, even with the risk of, correlated slashing, is not sufficient to enforce decentralization, you can just start reducing yields. Right? It's kind of trivial for the network to say, we're just going to look at validator location by ASN. And if it gets, for every percentage over 10, we're going to reduce the staking yields of every node in here by 1 percentage point. That'll solve it very quickly, right? I think the economic incentives are the most powerful incentive levers to like twist here to produce any sort of desirable result at the end. I mean, there's certainly other things you can do, which were, and we see this to some extent of regulatory arbitrage, right? So if there are regions of the world that say, hey, we'd actually love to build a blockchain industry here, and we're going to say all block rewards tax-free, right? Like those are still economic, but they're off-chain incentives for the same type of thing. I can't really think of any other reasons why someone would want to run a validator other than an economic incentive associated with it. But,
depending on what you mean by economic, but for example, for an RPC business, it makes a lot of sense, right? We run the validator and we don't take commission on the validator earnings because we can use the stake for laying transactions.
Right.
Things like that.
But that's still economic, right? Like by having access to stake-weighted QoS, you now have an edge over your competitors that don't have access to as much stake-weighted QoS. So this is like, I guess this is what I mean by like, I think it's, it's economics all the way down. That's sort of the way I tend to see this stuff. There's kind of a few examples of like altruistic type things, right, that are done. But those are usually done by something like the Solana Foundation, where we have an anti-profit, motive.
Yeah. Well, talking about economics, let's continue on the topic of the week, which is totally claims economic security is a meme. Justin Drake claims it's not. And I think I probably agree with Justin Drake there, but I'm curious what you think.
So I would say that something being a meme doesn't mean it's not real, right? There is certainly some value to the idea of economic security, but I think if you look at like crypto Twitter, you would think that 95% of Ethereum's security comes from staked Ether. And I would say that that is not at all accurate. 95% of, probably that might be 25% of Ethereum security. The other 75% comes from having 4 to 6 different validator client implementations, from having formal verifications of specs, by having all of this other technical work that's gone on to make the network of Ethereum quite decentralized, quite global, with lots of different software implementations that you can possibly use. To say that it's just the amount of value staked, I mean, this is sort of the thing of like, is Solana, whatever percentage is 700% safer now than it was in January? I think that's a pretty rough argument to make. Now, is it slightly safer than it was in January? Probably. Right? Just because of the economic value. But when people talk about economic security as like the one and only thing, it sort of is this idea that, could I build a business on another business that's more valuable than that business? I think the answer to that has to be yes, right? Or else like this stuff never works, right? I would imagine the sum total of economic activity that is built using chips made at TSMC is more valuable than TSMC. And if it has to be the case that TSMC is more valuable than everything that its chips ever touch or go into, that is not how markets work. That is not how the economy works. And so this over focus on economic security to say that to have $10 billion on chain, you must have $100 billion of economic security, or to have $100 billion on chain, you could not have $80 billion of L1 asset security. That feels wrong to me, and doesn't feel like that tracks with how anything else works in the market, right? The General Motors is worth more than the steel mine, right, that they build cars out of.
So moving on to the next kind of economic question, is something that everybody always kind of criticizes Solana for compared to, deflationary money, let's say, which is, there's Solana has inflation, has issuance, and then some people view issuance as a cost. Some people don't. Obviously, a lot of nuance gets lost on this on Twitter. So what are your thoughts? How would you describe it?
I think we have to start with a definition of what we mean by cost, right? In a perfect world where everyone is equally staked, like if 100% of a network is staked, it is not a cost to issue additional tokens because everyone maintains their pro rata ownership. Now, that is not what it is, right? Of course, right? Not 100% of all tokens are staked. And on top of that, you have other things like MEV and block building rewards and all these other things that make the system a little bit asymmetric. sell pressure is not a cost. I think this was one of those things where like I saw the Bankless guys kind of go oof, and Justin too, and like just on the base level economics, it is not a cost to the network if someone sells their tokens. It is not a cost, to use the analogy Tully brought up. Like if I sell my Apple stock, is that a cost to Apple? If we started seeing a wealth tax implemented in this country, is that now a cost to every dollar in circulation, to every house that exists, to every stock certificate that exists, to every token that exists on chain? These are independent economic systems, right? And so you can say that yes, there is, with high issuance on any token, you will have systems where some people have to sell to pay taxes. Other people will choose to cover that in by selling something else, right? Because they really believe in that long-term value of the asset. The analysis is not quite as simple as say, look at issuance, look at problem, right? The classic example of this is if you look at mortgage interest rates right now in the United States, they're high, no question about it. You know what else is high? Inflation. So the real cost of a mortgage, the real cost of a loan, right, is your mortgage rate minus inflation. And that's the true cost. And so when we actually want to look at something like what would be the cost of Solana's issuance to the network, and this is analysis that like I have not done, I would love if someone could do this, but it's very big data analysis, is kind of what percentage of those issued tokens are actually being sold, right? You can do some tracking because again, blockchains are all easily available public data, and figure out sort of what that looks like. But to say these things are just pure cost of issuance is tricky, right? Because issuance also is part of, in the world of some folks, the security model as well, right? So is this a cost? Is this a security model? Is this economic security? What are we actually looking at when we think about this stuff this way, right? Ethereum has about a 1.5% inflation rate right now on new issuance of tokens. And the burn that they have associated with that, is roughly keeping that in steady state. Sometimes it's inflationary, more times it's deflationary, but it's pretty close, right, across the board there. That's interesting to some extent. That is also a cost, right? It's a different kind of cost.
Honestly, I loved that debate, but I really thought they both candidly missed the mark on the entire issue. Is a cost debate. Like saying that taxes are the reason that it's a cost doesn't make any sense to me. That is one step removed from when the event happened, right? I issued the tokens, and whatever you do with them after that is irrelevant. To me, this really just quickly boils down to one thing. And I have to give a shout out to John Charbonneau on this. We debated this heavily over Telegram 10 months ago. And before we even started the debate, he was like, this is going to end with us disagreeing over one thing. It is the definition of the protocol or the network. Right? If you think issuance is a cost, you'll likely define the network as being like the code base, right? Or the code base is run by the validators, and it's sort of like this parasitic thing that I don't mean parasitic in like a negative way there. I just mean as like it like latches onto the validators and needs to attract users because it's like the validators become its host, if you will, right? And there's like this thing that exists that is external to the users and the validators. If you do not think issuance is a cost, you likely define the network as just the validators. That is really what it boils down to, which I find super, super interesting. But I think why this gets brought up so much is if you look at the dollar value of issuance between the two chains today, Solana is actually issuing a higher dollar value per day than Ethereum, which is interesting. But you're comparing
in gross emissions or net emissions?
Gross emissions.
Okay.
And that is because Ethereum is 9 years old now. It's been through a lot of its life cycle. It's been through multiple engineering cycles, and it has been through its economic revolution, if you will, right? They solved a lot of their initial onset of problems from an engineering perspective, and then they kind of sat down and wanted to make these economic decisions. That's kind of the same approach that, in my mind, Solana is doing. We recently did an episode with Tully and Lucas, and basically it kind of boiled down to this, a logical sequence of events here is let's solve the networking stack before we even consider touching a fee market, because we don't know the problems. And in Austin, this is exactly what you just said at the beginning of the pod was, hey, we got to figure out what the problems are. We're going to solve 9 things, and the 10th one will change everything. But I think the reason it gets brought up so much is we're comparing a 4-year-old chain today to a 9-year-old chain today. But what's so interesting is Solana has roughly a 5.5% inflation rate today.
Yeah.
And if you look at Ethereum, 4 years old Ethereum was about the same number. And so I feel like that just gets lost in the discussion quite a bit. And I think it's just part of the growth story for Solana.
Yeah. I mean, what Ethereum has achieved is incredible. And I always find it strange that somehow can't be compatible with Solana also being on a great trajectory too. That like one of the most toxic things in this industry is the idea of like your bags must go down for my bags to go up, right? And this sort of like, would it be really awesome today if Solana had the same market cap as Ethereum? Yeah. And if that happened, would it be really awesome if there were another network that had a slightly different take on how to build stuff, that had a credible vision for that was also about the same market cap as Solana and Ethereum? Yes. This is so, to me, this is so counterintuitive. This is so like zero sum, like bag brain, that it just drives me nuts. Because like the honest truth is all these networks are tiny. Like as a percentage of internet activity of global users, like no one is anyone. On a rounding error perspective, right? The least used social media network in the world has way more users than all blockchain combined when we're talking about something like Pinterest or Twitter. And that's actually makes me incredibly excited about the future of this technology. But like, there's a part of my brain that, is always thinking about the Roman Empire, right? And so you have to be thinking about like the minute you have, factional infighting within the Roman Empire, someone else just sweeps in from the north and like ruins everything for everyone for, several hundred years of human history. And there is sort of it's a strained metaphor here, but like there is something honest about this too. Is like blockchain is, or at least was a few weeks ago, under attack as a consensus opinion by a lot of governments and a lot of politicians in the world. And we're seeing that start to change. This is like not the time to be fighting each other about whose scaling roadmap is marginally better over a 6 to 18 month time horizon. This is the time to do, quite frankly, what the banks do, which is band together and, have a fairly cohesive vision of how we want structures to be built that allow this technology to grow and flourish, and then go back to fighting on Twitter once that's done. But like there is a larger threat right now. And the people who are like, well, the fact that there's an Ether ETF means Ethereum is safe from the government. Like, of course it's not. Are you kidding? Like, do you know anything about how the US government works? Like, there are separations of powers. These things are not connected at all. Just because one part of the government says this thing is good doesn't mean another one can't say it's bad. And so, we really have to keep our eye on the ball here, I think, especially, internationally.
Talking about good and bad, let's go to meme coins and social coins.
Yeah.
So that's a hot topic recently. And basically, for context, if you're somehow unfamiliar, but basically celebrities have launched coins on Solana, like a Caitlyn Jenner, or is it Iggy or Izzy? I don't even, I forget her name, but
IGGY, come on,
Iggy,
bro.
yeah.
I know you know her songs. Don't lie to me.
I actually don't. But anyway, so people have been catching heat over their opinions on this for some reason. Some people think it's good. Some people think it's bad. Vitalik basically said today that he doesn't like them, which is fine. But then people will accuse maybe Solana leadership, whatever that means, to promote them. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I mean, let me start out by saying I do not endorse any tokens. And I actually don't trade meme coins or celebrity tokens. I don't have the time, and I don't think I'd be very good at it. I've got a very busy full-time job, and so I'm not like watching the charts, which I think what you have to do to actually be a decent trader is like have it be your main job. On top of that, like I'm not a big participant in celebrity culture. I've never entirely understood the appeal. Well, I understand the appeal of it, but it's never really reflected at me. But like, so like this whole discourse kind of, for me, I found it a little bit frustrating because everyone talks about how they want global adoption of blockchain technology. They want users, they want normies, right? These are all the words that get thrown around. And celebrity culture is a huge part of modern culture. Right? Whether it is celebrity branded makeup, whether it's Elon Musk selling a flamethrower, like whether it is, sports jerseys that people wear to church because They think it's their nice new Christmas clothing, whatever it is, right? This is all celebrity culture. And I think some people would be annoyed at describing Elon Musk's flamethrower as celebrity culture, but that is exactly what it is at the end of the day, right? It's not a utility product. It is a fashion product, right? And that just happens to throw fire. But we look at these things, and crypto has a way of breaking down most relationships to their most bare economic systems. Friend tech, right? Buy and sell shares of your friends. That these types of systems always strip it down to the most base economic interest. And so if someone is going out there and they're buying the Air Jordans because they like how they look, they like how it makes them feel, they like the affiliation and association of having a sneaker with Michael Jordan on it. I don't know how different that is from someone going out and buying a meme coin or buying a celebrity coin because they want that emotional affiliation with the individual. There are objectively higher value shoes out there you can buy than Air Jordans. Not for you emotionally, not for you necessarily from an economics perspective if you're a long-term collector, but you can get a better sneaker for less money, and no one should be surprised by that, right? This is celebrity culture, and that's okay. But somehow it comes to blockchain, and a certain group of people think it's really icky, right? They're like, oh, this is exploitive, this is whatever, and at the end of the day, these are just stripping economic systems down to their most bare and raw values here. And I don't know why people are so upset by this, because these are permissionless, decentralized networks designed to let anyone do anything. And that may mean you don't like what they do. There's a lot of stuff that happens on blockchain that I personally have no interest in and don't like. I don't think that means it should be banned. I don't think that means people should be forbidden from creating it. That is the same kind of woke censorship that has taken over YouTube and has taken over, old Twitter and all these different areas. And yes, users need to not lose money, I guess. I'm not sure it is actually the responsibility of anyone to prevent people who are sovereign individuals who we've given them financial control over their money. We've given them financial controls that you literally can't get anywhere else in the world. And then we're going to come in and tell them how to spend their money. Something about that feels wrong to me. And this is setting aside things like, yes, I like that Phantom has, systems in it that will alert you if there's a link you're trying to click that's a wallet drainer that's been reported and they've verified that it's trying to rug you. But even there, you can go into Phantom and you can say, no, I know what I'm doing. I want to rug myself. Let me send this transaction. You click I agree enough and it will let you rug yourself. And that is the power of blockchain, the good and the bad. You can't have a self-sovereign money system and then try and control what people do on that money system. I'm not buying any celebrity tokens or celebrity NFTs or shares of my friends on FriendTech. That's not interesting to me, but I don't think we should be upset that people are able to do it. One of the really important things here to remember is a lot of people join the internet for pornography.
Right.
A lot of people bought a VHS. The reason VHS won over Betamax is because the porn industry picked VHS. Right? People forget that the less moral uses for this technology often precedes the use cases that change the world. Silk Road, perfect product market fit, right? One of the first uses for crypto, and that is not the blockchain of today, right? If you gatekeep this technology and its use cases too much, and you say, that's not a serious enough use case here. We are here to bank the unbanked. We are here to create alternatives to the financial system. A great way to start creating alternatives to the financial system that people want to use is to make them fun, to have things they want on chain. And that isn't always these virtuous, I want my Bitcoin because I'm a self-sovereign individual. Sometimes it could be, hey, a celebrity I like did a thing. I want to learn about that thing. I like this NFT drop. Oh, maybe I don't need a bank account anymore. Maybe I can actually start taking control of my financial future. Maybe I can start participating in on-chain governance because the politicians I vote for aren't listening to me. And then, you fast forward 2 years and this person's joined a network state, and they're living the Balaji dream. And we never know how this evolution happens. Everyone onboards in their own way. And so the thing that I just find difficult is when people want to stand in the way of users onboarding.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today, but one thing I really want to get from you is, what do you think is a vertical on Solana today that is a little bit underexplored, or you would love to see like initiatives to push further in that direction, like one vertical, one sector, something along that nature?
That's a really good question. I still think there's room to build something like Netflix on chain, podcast subscriptions on chain, some form of content gated access that allows people to have either more pay as you go relationships or, be able to have more subscription based relationships to content they would like to consume. For me, that feels like a big one where there really is product market fit. I really want on-chain decentralized social to work. So far, it hasn't, but that doesn't mean people should stop trying. But I think Solana, between the payments characteristics and a few other things, really has the ability to be a network where these type of sort of ongoing payment transactions and subscription type transactions are possible to do at scale.
All right. Anything else, Dan?
No, Austin, thanks a ton for coming on, man. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
No, I really appreciate you guys having me on today, and this was a good conversation.
This is fantastic. We'll put a link to your Twitter account there. I highly recommend everyone give him a follow. He's great on Twitter as well as he was on this pod. So, Austin, thank you again for joining us. Great conversation. And until next time, my friend.
Thanks, guys. Big fan of the show.